Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Rudman, and welcome to our, ready for this, 24th film in the series Let's Go to the Movies, which means that a virtual party is coming soon. Yes, it is. But for now, that 24th film is Hans Christian Andersen, as you know, starring Danny Kaye. Gigantic hit in 1952. And I bet many of you would vouch for that because you saw it when you were little kids. We are going to find out tonight whether that's the case, but I'm betting it will be. Frank Loesser wrote the music and lyrics right after the very urban Guys and Dolls. Can that be possible? That those two amazingly different scores came from that one man? And the answer is yes. He went from floating crap games to the story of the ugly duckling. My goodness. Our new participants should be reading this slide right now so you will know how to participate, not just by using the chat, but making sure that we see you on screen here in the land of Zoom, along with Deborah Matthews, Herb Drower, Daniel Hahn, Jack Valancy, and our other good buddies who come almost every time. And if you are a first timer, for heaven's sake, send Debbie Schinker a private message so we can add you to our mailing list. Right now, let us bring on Bob Knoll.
Welcome, Bill, and welcome everybody.
Hi, Bob. It's good to have you back.
Yes.
And I wanted to just absolutely kick off with you because I learned the other day that in its own small way, this film, when you were a kid, changed your life.
That's right, Bill. Once I saw this movie, I never killed an earthworm again my entire life. My earthworm. I'm sorry. Earthworm my entire life. Sorry.
Good. So that's the power of art.
I saved a lot of earthworms. Yes. Yes, this movie did.
That's good. That's good. Before we move into survey land, I want to introduce a new member of our company to you. We're so happy that Colleen Clement, you should raise your hand, Colleen, is our brand new business manager at the Musical Theater Project. You'll be seeing a lot of her, and she's totally delightful. So Bob and Debbie, it's survey time.
Yes, we have a couple questions for you all, okay? And you guys have been great participating. So the first question is, Debbie, was this your first time viewing this film? Okay, please respond. As the excitement builds.
I love this. I love doing this every week. Huh. Wow.
Say split.
Okay, so 29% said this is the first time, and 71% said they've seen this before, this movie. That is a good split.
I was a split.
You were a split. And you also have a cat.
All right, you want the second question?
Sure, part two.
Did you like this film? Yes, no, or were you neutral?
Oh my goodness, look at.
What if you have a split household? We need another survey.
Okay, so most of you did like this film. Okay, that's
I think
news.
91% is the highest we've ever gotten for approval. So that's great. We can all relax now because we know everybody's going to have a really good time. We want to say something about celebrating the 25th film. And now I'm really going to confuse everybody because we have a guest host for Film 25. It's going to be Trevor Offit. So we're going to wait until the next one to party, because when we get to the next film, Bob will be back with us and we will be reminding you to bring your beverage of choice. So not the next film, but the film after that, which will technically be number 26. I thought it was interesting when I found out that Sam Goldwyn actually produced 78 films, and this was the third most popular movie he ever produced, and it was toward the end of his career, right, Bob?
Yeah, and this was a gigantic hit too, which people were kind of surprised. A family children's show.
Yeah.
Originally what Goldwyn thought about doing was making this an animated film with getting Walt Disney involved. But then he reconsidered that, and of course he made this, I think, classic family film.
So, people like the Valances who want to know every little piece of trivia there is, you're going to want to know what the other two most popular films Goldwyn made were. And the answer is The Best Years of Our Lives from 1946. And several years after Hans Christian Andersen, he produced Guys and Dolls, which was another Frank Lesser show and another blockbuster. So let's get everybody jumping in here right now. Bob and I like to do that as soon as possible. We'd like to know what you think made this film a blockbuster in 1952. I mean, you heard me say in the introduction that Sam Goldwyn read 21 scripts before he decided on this one. And if you were Goldwyn, why would you have gone with Moss Hart's script, which is based on a 1938 story by Miles Connolly? What is it? What made the movie a blockbuster, do you think?
Okay, some comments? Anybody? Go on. Okay, Herb's got his hand up. Herb, yes?
I have to say Danny Kaye. He came on, he did, I think, Bill, you said in your introduction, he sang all 8 songs. He was the primary star, but he was just built to play Hans Christian Andersen. Even though you said, and I hope you'll enlarge on this, that he had some evil demons to fight, and I wasn't quite aware of that. But he comes across in this movie as just a real lovable guy. And the songs he had was lovable. I think Frank Lesser, as always, did a magnificent job in keying the songs to Danny Kaye, which I thought only Sylvia Fine could do, his wife, but I think Frank Lesser did a good job too.
One of the things that's interesting about, I'm sorry, go on, Bill.
No, you go, Bob.
Oh, I was going to say, one of the things that's interesting is that there was never a soundtrack released of this movie.
Right.
But Danny Kaye, Sylvia Fine got involved, and he recorded all the 8 songs in this cast album with George Jenkins, the orchestra. Jane Wyman did the song with him, and that was the top album for 17 weeks.
Wow!
On the Billboard list, it was a gigantic hit, and of course some of the other songs they added happened to be Sylvia Fine's. Danny Kaye's wife was also, a couple songs were added to that, but nobody seems. I tried to do some research. Nobody can figure out why they never did an original soundtrack of this album.
Yeah, I don't know either, but I do know, you probably know this, Bob, that Frank Lesser was not happy about that at all. He wanted an album in which the chorus from the movie and anybody who was singing in the movie was actually heard on the recording. So that's the way it goes.
Yep.
Anyway, it's the album we all grew up with, right, guys? So let's go on with some other things that you think made this movie a blockbuster in 1952.
Go on.
In addition to Danny Kaye and songs by Frank Lesser.
The songs.
I think in addition to the songs, the fact that there was a story that was interesting to adults, that so the parents could engage. It wasn't just a children's movie.
Not at all, right?
Not at all. Actually, it's kind of serious. It made me think, I'm sure I never got any of that stuff, that marital stuff, when I was not quite 5 when I saw it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very entertaining, but there are also very sad elements in this movie too. But it all holds together so well. And I told you in the intro that Moss Hart really took some knocks for this because it's a very un-Moss Hart-like piece of writing. He was a very urban kind of writer, and here he was doing this. What did you guys think of the screenplay?
I think it captured him, Hans, pretty well, because he was a melancholy person, a kind of sad life, and of course Moss Hart dealt with certain sadness about his life too. So I thought it seemed really natural and real what he did with the characters.
I did too. I think it's an excellent screenplay. I would never fault him for that. But so how about the ballets, which we also talked about in the intro, because the ballets actually make up 25% of this movie, which is almost unprecedented unless you go back to the Red Shoes from a few years earlier. How did you feel about the ballets? Did you feel engaged with them? Did you feel they went on too long? In the whole fabric of this movie, how did you think the ballets worked?
Okay, Bridget has a response. Bridget, you're muted. Okay.
Be a naysayer. I love this movie. So many things about it are wonderful, but I don't care for the ballets. The dancing's fine. I just don't care for the choreography. I think they go on a little too long. I'm just not a fan.
That's okay. And by the way, it's good to see you back full on camera again. Welcome back.
Part of the thing with the ballet was kind of interesting in that you notice that we have a French ballet company from France, literally was there. And that's because in 1948, Howard Hughes bought RKO. It was in bad shape. And he loved this dance troupe in France. So he brought it to Hollywood and said, we'll find work for you. Since he owned Trans World Airlines at the time, it didn't cost him anything. He brought this ballet company to Hollywood and he said, we'll find some gigs for you, some jobs. Well, he didn't. And so one of the things he basically told Samuel Goldwyn is, guess what? You're adding this ballet company to this movie. Okay, so that was one thing. And you're also going to hire, I liked Roland Petit, who did the choreography. And he said, I want them too. This is your group. Keep them busy. So, and it's also the director of this movie was not too thrilled by this because this Roland guy took over the staging of all those ballets. So about a fourth of this movie or fifth of this movie is really directed by a ballet master. So I don't know what that has to do with it other than that's why there's so much ballet in this. It was Howard Hughes's idea.
So there are always interesting reasons about how musicals get put together. And we would like to think that all the reasons are rational, but not always, right?
Right, and I'm not sure Moss Hart would have liked so much dance, especially the 25-minute number. It sort of stopped his screenplay. But what was brilliant about that, though, was the fact that that Danny Kaye's character experienced the ballet in his imagination, which means that you can then stage it, not like a realistic, theatrical event, but use all the different movie techniques. And again, that was not the director doing that, but it worked out pretty well. Made sense.
We're going to come back to Frank Lesser in a few minutes, but just one thing about him right now that I think is so phenomenal. As I mentioned, he wrote this right after Guys and Dolls. You couldn't ask for two musicals more different than those two shows. And when he was asked to write the songs for Hans Christian Andersen, he had already started writing The Most Happy Fella, which is what we could really call an American opera. So, I mean, was he a workaholic? Yes, he was a workaholic, a chain smoker, which basically killed him. He died of lung cancer far too young, but can you imagine all that stuff happening at just about the same time?
Bill, by the way, I've always believed that his father, had his son, of course, was the guy from Cleveland, right? Frank Lesser's son.
Not second cousin.
Arthur
Lesser ran the piano department at the Cleveland Institute of Music. And I always forget what the relation was.
I think I'm pretty sure it was his brother, but the bottom line was that the
half
father,
brother. He was his half brother.
Okay. And Frank Lesser always felt that his brother was superior in his father's eyes to him because he was doing classical stuff and Frank was doing the Broadway stuff. So I think
Arthur, yes, good point. And Arthur was very snobby about his half brother, Frank. Bridget, I hope you're offended by that. I know you're a classical music person, but it was so offensive. And of course, part of it was envy, because I mean, who was known, who really became famous? It was Frank. But there's a great little line about that if you've never heard of it. The line that began to be circulated was that Frank was the lesser of two evils. Isn't that great? It's a great line. I want to turn to our ace researcher, Jack Valancy, for a moment, because I wanted him to just find out a little bit more about Hans Christian Andersen, the man, because as I said in the intro, the Danish government at first was not happy with the screenplay. Hans Christian Andersen was their national hero, and they didn't feel that he was being treated respectfully enough. And it could have resulted in litigation, but Samuel Goldwyn agreed to put a title slide at the beginning of the movie that said that this is a fairy tale about a great spinner of fairy tales. Well, so I sort of took that at face value, but then Jack, who just always goes into the weeds, found out that there's a little bit more truth in this movie about the actual Hans Christian Andersen than I knew, right, Jack?
Well, yeah, Bill, thanks. There are some glimpses of the real Hans Christian Andersen. At 14, he left school for poor children in Odense, and he moved to Copenhagen, where he joined the Royal Theatre Company as a soprano. Then his voice changed. Though benefactors helped him continue his education, his teachers actually discouraged his writing, and the schoolmaster abused him. Andersen later called his school years the darkest and most bitter of his life. H.C. Andersen published short stories, novels, science fiction, theatrical pieces, and travelogues. Now, the critics really did not like his first collection of fairy tales. So, what do the critics know? Soren Kierkegaard considered Andersen rather moody, and in his private journals, Andersen recorded a period of celibacy. Now, Andersen became friends with Charles Dickens, but a weekend at Dickens' home turned into a 5-week stay, and he was asked to leave. Afterwards, he could not understand why his letters went unanswered. Now, Andersen fell in love with unattainable women, including Jenny Lind, the Swedish Nightingale, to whom he gave a letter of proposal while she was boarding a train. She wrote back, "Farewell, God bless and protect my brother is the sincere wish of his affectionate sister, Jenny." Now, Andersen also fell in love with a few men, some more attainable than others. One gave Andersen a silver toothbrush for his 57th birthday, and well, we're going to let the diehards dissect that one. All right, back to you, Bill.
Okay, we'll depend on you for Jack to lead that discussion. This was a big budget movie, as Bob knows. I tracked that down. This was made for $4 million, which adjusted for inflation today would be a $40 million movie. And it much more than made back its costs. And $14,000 were spent on ballet shoes alone, which would amount to $56,000 in 2021. So Sam Goldwyn literally spared no expense on this. Jack, not to center this on you too much, but I bet you like the art direction, because this film is shot beautifully, and the scenery, this sort of gingerbread scenery, is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, the vibrance in the color mix, the vibrance is just turned up a lot. So the colors are really, really vibrant, and the art direction, the wardrobe is fantastic. As we corresponded a little bit earlier today, the lighting, cinematography is pretty much straight up. So nothing fancy there, but boy, what a beautiful, beautiful picture.
What a beautiful looking, yeah.
It was up for an Academy Award actually for that.
Both the set pieces and the matte paintings, the backgrounds that were painted that
Yes,
they used.
the matte painting.
I thought the matte paintings were extraordinary, actually.
Yeah, the wardrobe and as well as the wardrobe.
Yeah.
And this is something that I can insert right now. Sandy, we'll come back to you right after I say my little thing here. Jack, interesting that you said Copenhagen, because that's the correct pronunciation. The song by Frank Lesser is Wonderful, Wonderful Copenhagen. And later on, Lesser apologized for that because it turns out that Copenhagen was what the Nazis called it. Isn't that interesting? That's really interesting. So Copenhagen is the way to pronounce it. The story songs like The Ugly Duckling have been called, I love this term, they've been called therapeutic fables. And what does that mean to you? What does that term mean to you? Therapeutic fables. Bridget, you're shaking your head as though you might have some clue.
Oh, I find them so soothing and so comforting to hear. It makes me feel like, hey, if I'm not fitting in or if I don't feel good about myself, there's still hope for me. You know, it's very soothing.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, as we pointed out in the intro, those story songs, those are very difficult to write. You know, if you ever, I don't know about you, I don't know, maybe you guys are all good at telling jokes at parties. I really stink at telling jokes at parties because I can't do it with a beginning, a middle, and an end where it really reaches some sort of climax. But can you imagine, you know, trying to do something like that in a song that needs a beginning, a middle, and an end, and comes out in some place that is emotionally satisfying? Frank Lesser had a great knack for that. For example, in Guys and Dolls, Sit Down, You're Rockin' the Boat is a story song, and a delightful one at that. Sandy, I know you were ready to go.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I just want to add that in addition to Farley Granger, my other favorite supporting actor was Joey Walsh, who played Peter. I think that his smile and devotion to Hans added another joyful zest to the movie. I loved every scene that Joey Walsh was in. And actually, Joey Walsh is still alive at 83.
I looked him up too, yeah, 83.
Yeah, he's still alive. I've seen him in some supporting acting roles, and I think he was in the Kraft Theater over the years. He wrote a film called California Split, which is about gambling, and apparently he was a gambler himself. It was a big part of his life. So he's stayed in, and I don't believe I have not seen California Split, but he did stay in the theatrical film world for his life.
Yeah, he was a screenwriter too.
Right.
But I think there's no doubt his most famous appearance was in this film.
Yes.
He held his own with Danny Kaye, which is
he held his own.
He does. You're right, Bob.
He did.
Does. That would have been
That's
hard to do.
Right.
Yeah, he could have.
That's the reason I loved him.
He didn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
His
yeah.
smile could light up the screen. And to me, his smile represented the hope that this movie brings. It could bring it to children and adults alike.
Right. And it's at the very end of the film when Hans is quite despondent, really, about losing his love and going back to the small town. It's really Peter who cheers him and inspires him to carry on with his life. I think the ending's very touching.
Bill,
anybody want to add to what? Oh, sorry, Bob. Go ahead.
Steve has his hand up. He's been having Steve. No. Okay, you got your hand.
No, that was up from before.
Oh,
I was
Arthur as well.
Arthur.
agreeing with Bridget on the ballet. That was
Okay.
A couple things.
Two anti-ballet people, at least in terms of length.
First of all, Bill, the problem with the recording here reminds me of there being no original cast recording of Where's Charlie?
I know.
Another Lesser show. Yeah. Gee.
Right. We're left with Norman Wisdom, who was fine, but still we don't have it. And the a movie is still awaiting Joe Lesser's approval for it to come out in a restored version that
Yeah, I
everyone,
know, we've been waiting for years, Arthur. For
yes.
years.
And it would be wonderful if the City Center revival, which I saw.
And it was excellent.
Yes,
It
it
was
had all the
excellent.
dance music, which I'd never
Had
heard
everything.
before.
Yeah.
And they haven't released that on CD. But I agree with the melancholy, and I think that that is enhanced by Farley Granger.
Yes.
And he reminds me of the reports of Frank Lesser, a mean man whom a number of people at least loved, his family or his second family loved, but and it shows with both Danny Kaye and Frank Lesser how not very nice people can create beautiful moving art.
I think we have to ask Bob about that because I think it's a split opinion about that. I've actually read that although Frank could be a very tough guy, that he really had a heart of gold. And I think, Bob, you heard that first.
Yeah, very much so, because I worked with this famous producer named John Kenley, and he had a bar in New York City. And when Lesser was starting out, he was playing Kenley's bar. He loved the guy, and he actually partied with him over the years. And he also thought he was just a terrific guy. I mean, that was all that he never said anything negative about Frank Lesser at all. So I don't know, you know, I didn't know him, so it's hard to tell, but he just seemed like a really nice guy, a life of the party. Like Bill said, a chain smoker, and he liked to drink, but he just said he was easy to deal with, and he was just very kind to him. So that's all I know about Lesser.
And another thing I think, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Arthur.
Another thing that I think helped the movie was there were no Goldwyn girls.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the palette in the country was subdued. It was gingerbread, but it was green and brown. And then that changed to brightness in the city. And I thought that the palette in the country and the use of the different palettes in the different places was subtle and beautiful. And let me ask you, Bill, and this goes to that story that I wrote to you about the comedian who was put up for a Danny Kaye bio.
Yeah.
Which was, and it goes to your last Sirius XM. I've never heard a cover of any of the Danny Kaye songs. People don't cover Danny Kaye.
You don't touch them, right?
No.
You don't touch. No.
Right. So,
You're right.
And even though Lesser didn't know him, it's almost as if every song that Danny Kaye touches is tailored to him.
Yeah, I agree. Now, I'm sorry, I'm just going to go into the weeds for a second, but I can't resist. I think the reason that this didn't get an original soundtrack recording was that at the time, Danny Kaye was under contract to Decca Records. And you may recall, you guys, you diehards, that the same thing happened with Call Me Madam, where Ethel Merman was under contract to Decca. Therefore, we only have Merman on a sort of studio cast thing with Dick Haymes playing opposite her. But for the cast album of Call Me Madam, we're kind of stuck with Dinah Shore. And I love Dinah Shore, but not in that role, Anyway, had to toss that in. I think I was interrupting somebody who had a hand up. No? Anybody want to add to what Bridget said about therapeutic fables? Because I love that term so much. If not, let's get.
One of them was The Ugly Duckling was specifically therapeutic. And if
Absolutely.
you remember later, the father even thanked Hans for helping his son through a difficult time. The child had been ill and had his head shaved, whatever that was about. And the fable helped him. And then it helped Hans later. So that one was very specifically therapeutic. And we do things like that in mental health with real patients.
And Inchworm is therapeutic in its own way as well. Bridget Emerson in the chat writes, the rocking, static, measured music of Inchworm is also very soothing. Good word, soothing. And the reminder to enjoy beauty. Inchworm also encapsulates the difference between a doing culture and a being culture. Bridget, I'm going to take you out to lunch for that. That's such a great observation. And
Bill,
I
that
love
also
it
shows
because
that
it's
the
sort of,
show, I'm sorry,
no, go ahead, Bob.
that the show, as you said in your intro, is a quiet musical, quiet show. And I think
It
that the
is.
whole, everything they sing is pretty soothing when it comes to, it has a message. And that's why I think little kids just love these songs, you know, growing
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, Arthur and I had a go round about quiet musicals, and he reminded me of a couple that I had forgotten, but I think we could agree that there are only a handful of them. Musical theater is not a quiet medium by tradition. And yet this is a notable exception. Herb Brower, did you have something you wanted to add?
No,
to
no,
that?
I would, no, thank you.
Okay, so let's get personal for a moment. We're at a disadvantage because whenever we get personal, Lynn Bartle is usually here, and she's usually the first to get right out there. But I want to ask you this. You know, this movie is very much about fantasy. Do any of you know anybody who lives in fantasy? I'm not asking you to name names, but I'd love to know if you know anybody who does live in fantasy and what the fantasy, what kind of fantasies they may be. I don't want to get anybody into trouble, but anybody have any stories there?
Am I allowed to mention the last election, or is this not a political show?
That's a good one.
Touche, Herb.
Bridget, you were going to add to that. Bridget?
Well, I've seen someone who lives in fantasy, and this particular person tries on the personalities, clothing, like they purchase clothing, get their hair cut like, buy shoes like, adopt speech patterns, mannerisms of various fictional characters. And they sort of try things on. So they don't seem to have like a real personality of their own that's fully formed.
Interesting.
Hey,
Kim,
Bill,
looks like
we have somebody new who's got her hand up. Kim Rosenfield
Good.
down there.
Hi.
How do you do, Kim?
Hi.
Welcome to our series.
Thank you. We love it. I'm Amy's sister, and this is Amy's mom, Barbara.
Okay, great.
I wanted to respond to your question, and then Barbara also had made a comment earlier that would lead to another question. But one of the things that I think is sort of there adds a lot of pathos to this is that when I watch it, I think, God, am I living in don't we all live in kind of our own fantasy world? And do we, you know, what is reality? And so I think it's kind of universal. And it's a little bit scary because of that. You know, you wonder, am I also? Then what Mom's question was, is she was saying that she couldn't imagine anyone other than Danny Kaye playing that role. And so I wondered if there was any history about whether anyone else had been considered for it or anything like that.
Well, Bob, you can talk about London.
Yeah. Tommy Steele did it for an entire year in the late 50s to a big success. He played it for a year. Then a few years later, he played it again in London, and it was just a big popular hit both times. So he's an example of someone else that played the part that did really well with it. That did well with it. I know now there's a cast album of that. I know Bill has, and I have.
And
he did a pretty nice job.
It's terrible. I don't like that cast album at all.
Well, the problem was Frank Lesser didn't write most of the new songs. It was written by somebody else. So that was like only half the score. So I think that's why I agree the score isn't as good, because half the songs aren't by Frank Lesser. Yeah.
Anybody else know anyone who lives in at least partial fantasies?
Well, I would say everyone here, as we are drawn in to performance art, partakes of the fantasy, the willing suspension of disbelief is a fantasy, and I love it. I love it, and I read one book about how what theater, the importance, called The Importance of Theater, or the Necessity of Theater. This teaches us with ourselves how to be compassionate and how to have empathy.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are moved, or when I cry, and I cry frequently at movies, and I cried in this one,
Yeah.
that's becoming part of the story.
I agree, and I'm going to be so bold as to tell you guys something that I've rarely told anybody. But I entered my own fantasy world at about 6 years old. And I bet you some of you can relate to this. And it's all about musical theater. I discovered musical theater. I discovered LPs of cast albums. And I don't want you to think that I didn't have a happy childhood. I had a wonderful family and we were very close. But my sister would tell you that from a very early age, I would spend most of my time in my bedroom with the door closed, listening to my record albums. And I think if that's not a fantasy world, I don't know what is. I was lucky enough to be able to turn it into a career, but I very much created my own world with those stories and those thousands of songs that I began to listen to when I was such a kid. Any of you relate to that? See, I think that sort of what we, those of us who call ourselves musical theater geeks, I think we all have at least a part of that in us, don't we? Am I right? Am I wrong?
Bill, what attracted you to those soundtracks to the Broadway shows other than the popular music? What was it about the cast albums that did it for you?
Thank you for asking that. I know it was, and I can date it from when I saw Mary Martin do Peter Pan on TV. What slayed me was that these characters were singing what they felt. That's what really got me. I had never been exposed to that before. And that, of course, is the hallmark of musical theater, singing or dancing what they felt. Even in some ways more important than the dialogue. So that's what did it. How about you, Bob? I mean, you and I are cut out of the same cloth.
Yeah, I just like storytelling that what a musical theater song does. It's an art piece because it has a beginning, middle, and end. It moves plot forward. There's a reason for every song. I mean, I think that is high art. It's not a 3-minute pop song where you just sing about she left me tomorrow, and so I'm going to sing about she left me tomorrow. It doesn't go anywhere. Musical theater songs go someplace, and I have so much respect for people that can write those kind of songs. That's why I love musical theater.
And there's another element that also speaks to me, which is Mark Stein said that they wrote, who is not Jewish. He's Episcopal, I found out. Episcopalian.
Steyn.
Yes. And he wrote a book about musical theater. And in the book,
really good.
Yes, he says that the strong melodic line is cantorial, and is Jewish singing. And that, when I hear musicals, and almost all the A-list except for Cole Porter were Jewish, I connect with my heritage.
Yeah,
because I'm Jewish, and that has meaning to me. It wasn't the first thing, and I got involved with Peter Pan, and I also closed my room and listened to all these old records, and still do. But I think that that's part of it. It's way I can connect with my Jewish heritage.
I've always said that in a past life, I must have been Jewish, or in my next life, I will be Jewish, because I connect with exactly what you connect. And it's been pointed out, Arthur, that almost all of the great songwriters for the musical theater were Jewish. And that if you take even their ostensibly happy songs that are up tempo, and if you slow them down, in many, many cases, you find harmonically and melodically music that can be traced to Jewish roots.
Wonderful. Yeah, I was just gonna say.
Somebody unmute your mic.
No, the Falcons have their hands up, and then Daniel and Jack also have hands up.
Oh boy.
I was just thinking as we were talking, the first musical that truly transported me was South Pacific. I mean, I was just there. And even thinking about it transported me. That was my first one.
Great choice.
I wanted to say that being married to an actress, I'm never sure what's fantasy and what's not.
But that must be fun, because you don't know. So it's already, you're always guessing, huh? That's good. Just one quick note about Farley Granger, because a couple of you have complimented him, and he's not all that well remembered today. But the two films that he's best remembered for were both Hitchcock films. They were The Rope and Stranger on a Train. And in this movie, he's almost uncannily handsome, isn't he? And in a way, to use your word, Arthur, that helps create the pathos, because you have Farley Granger as opposed to Danny Kaye, who is looking like Danny Kaye. And it's such a contrast. But Farley Granger is terrific, although to go back to the point about Danny Kaye having the reputation of often being nasty, he and Farley Granger did not get along well at all on this movie, at all. And Danny Kaye didn't get along with what's her name, who played the lead. You know who I'm talking about. What's the name I'm looking for?
Jean-Marie Zizi or Zizi?
Yeah, Jean-Mer, Zizi Jean-Mer. He had very little patience with her because he didn't think that she spoke English well enough. Jean-Mer, some of you may know, actually was for about 5 minutes a Broadway star. A couple of years later, she did a musical called The Girl in Pink Tights, that is a fictionalized version of the making of The Black Crook, which many people think is sort of the first American musical. So that's the Jean-Mer thing. I think Jean-Mer is delightful in this. I think everybody's delightful in this, you know, everybody. I think we're just, yes, it always comes out at 45 minutes where it feels like we're at the end of the regular session. Anybody else want to add anything before we move into miscellany and the dialogues? Oh, Jack
Three people with their hands up, Bill.
Yes,
good.
Steve,
And let's hear from all of them.
Steve has his hand up, Bill. Steve?
I just wanted to say quickly, you know, I had never seen this movie before, and you know, I've seen a lot of Danny Kaye, and thank you for introducing me to it. I think I avoided it because, you know, I love Danny Kaye, but sometimes he's a lot to take, and I thought in this musical he was going to be a lot to take, and I was so impressed by how subdued he was. And growing up as a kid in the 70s, I remember him being on variety shows and everything, singing songs with groups of kids. And it always seemed a little forced to me, you know, but in the movie, those scenes with those kids, I thought, I don't know if it's just him or the direction, but I thought those were so touching, and I was just overwhelmed by those. And I was shocked that I was overwhelmed by it because I didn't expect to be. So
Daniel, you have something? Daniel, you have your hand up? No? Your hands up. Okay.
Yeah, I would say, I'm sorry, I was just reflecting on what was just said, and you're speedier, your brain is speedier than mine, Bob, because I'm still reflecting on that point about how touching he is.
Daniel, love the backdrop.
Oh, thank you. You know, for me, the Peter character is an important anchor in this film.
Yes.
And the scene when they have their disagreement is heartbreaking to me
It
when
is.
he's trying to tell him what he's in his heart and he's not being heard. It's just heartbreaking. And it made me realize how beautifully acted this piece is and how the story just holds together so well. I was reminded by Danny Kaye's performance in some ways, never having, of course, Bill, I haven't seen this movie before. This is my first time you've introduced me to yet another one, everything except the music, man. How he reminded me a little bit of Gene Wilder's calmer moments in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory a little bit, just stylistically perhaps, and tone and grace with children. I will say, just back one last thought about the kids, about fantasy. And when you ask that question, do you know anyone who lives in fantasy? I thought of my own twin boys, because they play these interactive video games. I'll give you one example. One is called Fortnite, and it's ridiculously popular, not as high as its peak in 2018, but like just in April, I think they had like 350 million user accounts, most of them children, 3.3 billion hours of logged in time just in the month of April on this game. And it's an entire fantasy. These kids are, picking out costumes to wear and clothing, and they're dive bombing. And now, unfortunately, from my perspective, it takes the form of competitive violence in many of these games.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, the element of fantasy. And I used to read my boys Hans Christian Andersen. I have the complete works next to me, and their favorite story was 1835 called Little Claus and Big Claus, about these, interestingly, a little bit of a violent tale, Hans Christian Andersen. But the storytelling, it's just so beautiful. And Chrissy came in late tonight, as I had already begun, last night, as I already began the movie. And she came in at the moment when he was just leaving for Copenhagen. And he was singing a song, and she saw Danny Kaye, and she had the similar reaction to the last person who spoke. I think it was Steve, who said, "Oh boy, here we go with Danny Kaye." But the film instantly won her over. And we were just sitting in silence watching it. It captivated me. It was so gentle, and I just needed that gentleness. So that's my end of my speech. I loved it. Thank you.
Jim, you have something to say, Jim?
Wait. Go back to Daniel Hahn for a minute, because I just want to point out something in his always beautifully chosen backdrops. We got to see that again.
Okay, I'll speak to bring it up to this.
Because what I love about this, Daniel, and it's certainly true of the girl as well, but if you look at what's happening between Danny Kaye and Peter in this shot, I mean, that is a magnificent acting moment right there. And it's emblematic of the entire film. So we should probably give props to the director, who never became a household name, but who is Charles Vidor, probably best known for a Gene Kelly breakthrough film called Cover Girl, which we will get to eventually, and also the Doris Day film about Ruth Etting, Love Me or Leave Me.
Bill, Moss Hart too, he wrote that scene as a playwright. I mean, it's beautifully written.
It's beautifully written, yes. Thanks for always taking us back to the right.
Right.
That's good. I appreciate that. There were a few more hands, Stebby?
Yeah, a few more hands. Jim and John, you both have your little markers up with your hand, no? Okay.
I just wanted to say, mention's already been made about the look of the film, and I think it's well noted. It's a Goldwyn production after all, but another thing that the Goldwyn studio was noted for was its sound. And the sound of the film, given especially that it's 1952, has a clarity and presence that is remarkable. In addition to which, the orchestrations were by Jerome Moross, who worked.
Yes, a composer in his own right.
Right, and they're wonderful.
I'm so glad you remarked on that. You guys, if you've never heard Jerome Moross's score for The Golden Apple, you can either get the 1 CD original cast, or it's now available as the complete show on 2 CDs. I'm not kidding. The Golden Apple, which is a retelling in early 20th century America of, ready for this, the Iliad and the Odyssey, Daniel Hahn. What do you think about that in a musical?
I got to tune in.
Kate Ballard, and thank you for saying that. Jerome Ross is one of my heroes. Any other hands?
John, you had a question? You had your hand up?
Yeah, thanks. So first of all, just real quick, Daniel, I agree with you completely. I think Gene Wilder must have patterned at least part of his performance on this. And I'd never seen this before either. I'm curious whether anyone had a similar reaction to what I did about the character of Hans Christian Andersen, which is he was very childlike in a way that I think if they made the movie today, they would get hung up on where on the spectrum he was. I don't think it would be able to be presented. I mean, even like he was so immature. He wasn't childlike. He was immature. He was, and his treatment even of Peter, the way that he turned on a dime on Peter also shows that immaturity. And even I had to go back and put the closed captioning on when they're coming back to the village. They come to a tree and Hans Christian Andersen says bread and butter as they're walking. I don't know if anyone else caught that. They come to a tree, they're going to go on different parts. And I had to look it up, but apparently this is a thing you do. You don't separate from your friend when you're walking on a path unless you say bread and butter. So this, like under his breath, he says bread and butter and he comes around the tree the other way.
Wow. Bob, there's Moss Hart for you again.
Yeah, Moss Hart. Yeah. He did a few
That's
good
great.
musicals
Thank you,
too.
John. That's a good one.
Yeah. But there's a
Somebody
few more
else?
people. Want to say something? Jack?
Well,
Jack?
I just wanted to add to that last comment that Søren Kierkegaard in Andersen as Novelist remarks that Andersen is characterized as, quote, a possibility of a personality wrapped up in such a web of arbitrary moods and moving through an elegiac duodecimal scale of almost echoless dying tones, just as easily roused as subdued, who, in order to become a personality, needs a strong life development.
Oh boy.
You know, we can chew on that in the after party.
Yeah, even Daniel Hahn could not have written that. That's really something.
Okay, there was somebody else had a comment. One more. Okay, Sue.
Yeah, I just wanted to say again how every song in this movie was a gem. Every single one. I don't, I've just gone around humming them the whole time. The words, the music, sometimes they seem simple. I loved, and I didn't realize I had forgotten that it was from this film, No Two People Have Ever Been So in Love. That one people did do a cover of. A lot of people did a cover of, but
true. That's true.
I just can't imagine a nicer, sweeter score.
No.
Jack, you have something else to say?
Isn't it surprising? Wait, just let me comment on that. Isn't it surprising that Frank Lesser thought that Thumbelina was an inferior piece of writing? It embarrassed him because it's so simple and it's captivating. It does exactly what it needs to do, and it's staged so beautifully with his fingers and in the jail and da 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 da. I mean, it's great. Okay, who was next?
Jack had something. Jack, you had that hand up, no?
Oops, no. Audio. We need your audio, Jack.
Okay. No, I'm good. I just wanted to read that point about Kierkegaard, what he said about Andersen, that he was kind of a moody guy. I mean, he was an eccentric guy. He was, and given his difficult upbringing and background, we can chew on that in the after party as well.
If he had been able to, he probably would have listened to cast albums in his bedroom too, don't you think? We'll move on to miscellany. I want to thank Jack for a comment that he made in the chat that refers to my earlier remark that in a past life, I must have been Jewish. And Jack comments that I can be Jewish in this life. Thank you, Jack.
And it's very simple procedure. If you want me to introduce you, I'll find one.
That's great. Thanks, guys. Miscellany, we're letting you off the hook tonight. We only have 3 to hit you with. Bob, the next movie.
Okay, the next movie is Cabin in the Sky. That's a Vincent Minnelli's 1943 movie with an all-star, all African-American cast. Ethel Waters, Lena Horne, Eddie Rochester Anderson, and Duke Ellington. And a lot of great songs that like Taking a Chance on Love, etc. And that'll be Thursday, March 27th. Okay, at 7 o'clock. Thursday, March 27th.
May 27th. May
27th, sorry.
May 27, yeah. Yeah, good, that's gonna be fun. Okay, well, here it is again. This is our invitation to you to make a donation to the Musical Theater Project tonight. If you enjoyed this discussion, if you didn't, then you don't need to contribute. But if you did, by all means, and of course the intro that we produced that you saw a week ago, any amount that is meaningful to you would be just fine with us. And we really mean that, any amount. And finally, the last piece of miscellany is going to be a lyric, and it's got to be by Frank Lesser, of course. And this is an early film song that seems timely right now. And I bet even you brainiacs, I bet maybe only one or two of you know that this was introduced by Deanna Durbin, of all people. And it just seems like right now on, what's today's date? May something? Whatever it is. May 6th. We should hear this beautiful lyric. And the music is gorgeous, but the lyric will have to do. It goes like this. Spring will be a little late this year. A little late arriving in my lonely world over here. For you have left me, and where is our April of old? You have left me, and winter continues cold. As if to say, spring will be a little slow to start, a little slow reviving that music that it made in my heart. Yes, time heals all things, so I needn't cling to this fear. It's merely that spring will be a little late this year. Perfectly stated. Thank you all. The diehards remain, but Barb and Debbie and I, Bob and Debbie and I, thank you for being with us again, and we'll see you in a few weeks, okay?
Thank you.
Ta-ta.
Okay.